a registered social worker, author of the Amazon best-selling book, Making It to Monday, to tell us about her and her family's epilepsy journey. Thanks so much for joining us, Jennifer, and please take it away.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. And I'm laughing because before this meeting started, I talked about how nervous I was. And now as I'm about to start, my cat just jumped on my lap. So if you see a little head pop up, I apologize. That's just Gilbert wanting to say hello. So I'm actually very honored to be here today and to be speaking to you all. Epilepsy is something that's definitely changed my life and the life of my family. And so I'm here to share my story. And hopefully build some connections and help. That's really why I wrote the book, and that's why I'm here today. So I have a bit of a slide deck. If we can put it up, that'd be great, but we don't, if not, that's okay too. And perhaps I'll dive in. So like I said, I didn't know a ton about epilepsy. It was something I knew a little bit about before 2018. And really ended up changing my life in a variety of ways. So I know right now that I'm speaking to a bunch of experts in the room, not just in lived experience, but perhaps in caregiving as well. And today, my hope is that I share a little bit about mine and my family's journey with epilepsy over the last 5 years, as well as tools and strategies that I've used during this period of time to help with my own healing alongside my son and my family. So you know, my name is Jennifer Nunes, and I'm a registered social worker. I'm the clinic director at Neurosoul Therapy. I am the author of Making It to Monday. And most importantly, I'm the mom to 2 pretty cool kids, Dominic and Loren, and the wife to, he's pretty good too, my husband, Paul. So I've been working in the field of mental wellness since 2012, and it is an area that I truly feel is a vocation. So the fact that I get to walk alongside clients when they're on their own journey of self-discovery, of developing growth mindset, and of healing, it's truly an honor to be able to do that. The things that you may not know about me that you're going to learn today, first of all, and probably the most obvious, is I'm a chronic talker. So it's something I really love to do. This is probably why I agreed to do it for 30 minutes or so. I also am a bit stubborn. You can ask my husband, he'll probably agree with that. And I love to laugh. This is something I think is so important. I find laughter to be medicinal. I am an emotional person, and I value honesty and, most importantly, vulnerability, which is something that did not always exist inside me. I love to learn, especially when I can apply the teachings to my own life. That's, I think, why I like to share my story and the story of what I've learned in my profession as well, to help build connection, healing, and growth in all of us. I wrote Making It to Monday, chronicling our road to recovery after everything that happened with my son, because I actually went looking for a book when we were in hospital of something that would be honest with me about the darkness, about the uncertainty, about the isolation and loneliness, the fear and confusion, and the grief that I was feeling. But I also wanted optimism about the future, and it didn't exist. So I couldn't find it. Shortly thereafter, realizing we had no medical cause for what happened to our son, it was considered a fluke, I decided maybe I should be that person to make meaning out of this. And if I could share my story to help someone else who might feel isolated and alone along their own journey, then it was worth it, and I was going to do that. But the truth is, I've never had a seizure. And I learned about epilepsy because my aunt has epilepsy and had a few seizures throughout my life. So I learned about what it was sort of at a very high level when I was young. And I became a caregiver to a little boy with epilepsy and other health issues in 2018. I recognize that my story is going to be very different than some others that are here. And we go back to the journey. Yeah, just leave it there for a while. Thanks. My journey is going to be different than others. Our trajectory and our outcome may not be what happens for other people. Mine is just one perspective, one experience, and a vast array of unique experiences that we all have. So what's a happy story for me may not be a happy story for someone else. What's traumatic for me may not be traumatic for others. And I think it's important that we validate our own experience and we recognize that we really are the experts in our own life. Hopefully, my story will help build connection and camaraderie and increase hope and healing in your lives, and mine included. So I'll dive in. January 25th, 2018 was a very boring day. I put my 7-month-old Dominic to bed, my 2-year-old Loren, and did the normal routine. The next morning around 4:30, Dominic woke up stirring and crying. And this was actually quite unlike him. So we assumed he was teething. He's our second child. He had all the other signs for teething, and we assumed the position on trying to soothe him overnight. He didn't fall asleep right away, and it took actually quite a while. And by the time he did fall asleep, it was the time that my husband had to get up for work. We agreed to let him sleep since he was so upset earlier, and we assumed it was his teething. A couple of hours later, after checking in on him every 20 minutes or so, I was sitting on the couch. If anyone has a toddler, I was watching Peppa Pig, which is a very popular show, drinking coffee, and something just didn't feel right. Normally, he would have been awake by now, and something in my gut said that I should wake him up. I went into the room and I noticed he actually wasn't very easy to wake up like he normally would be. Once he did wake up, he appeared very lethargic, and actually his breathing pattern began to change. I contacted health professionals, and very quickly we were taken to local hospital. A pediatrician came to assess him quickly and told me it was one of three things. It was meningitis, seizures, or a stroke. Turns out it was two of three. Dominic had no other health issues, no genetic disorders. He was born typical, healthy baby one morning, and at 7.5 months old, he suffered a major ischemic stroke that left him with hemiplegia and other issues, including epilepsy. He was put on anti-epileptic seizure medication the same day, and the medical team was actually hopeful that he may, what they called, outgrow the seizures, and perhaps medication wouldn't be needed forever. They even tried to wean him off the medication after his first birthday because he had been pretty stabilized at that point. However, that was short-lived, and by July, we were seeing seizures daily, and he was put back on medication. As a mother, I struggled big time with self-blame and guilt. I judged myself for not being good enough for a very long time. I had thoughts like, I should have woken him up sooner. I should have known that cry sounded different. I should have brought him to the hospital immediately. I blamed myself for his stroke and the epilepsy when he had no known medical cause and all the issues that occurred as a result. With every seizure, with every trip, with every inability to use his left hand, there was a reminder to me that I wasn't good enough. And I carried that with me and tried to bury it deep within to my own detriment. In an attempt to make myself feel better, I dove headfirst, or what I call the swan dive, into being the ultimate caregiver and parent. I tried to learn as much as I possibly could about neurology, about epilepsy, about stroke rehabilitation, all of it. I asked the questions, I made lists, I took courses on brain injury. I researched the anticonvulsant medications and all the known side effects. I joined support groups online for parents and kids, parents of kids in similar situations. As helpful as those networks were, by ignoring my emotions, the overwhelm grew, as did the guilt and shame that I was trying to process. In April 2020, about a month into the pandemic lockdown, things changed dramatically. I was working from home at the time as a school social worker and running my private practice part-time. I was helping my daughter do virtual online learning, and for kindergarten, that is a nearly next to impossible task, and watching Dominic as my husband was an essential worker and had to leave home every day. One day I was sitting at the computer at the dining table, watching the kids have lunch, and I noticed Dominic have what looked like a muscle cramp. I hadn't seen a seizure in almost 2 years, and this was by no means a big one. I'm not even sure if other people would have noticed it, but I felt it, and I had a feeling the seizures were back. I reached out to the clinic, and I was told what I'm sure other people here are familiar with, to try to get it on tape because they always want to have video, right? And we ended up bringing him in for an EEG because the episodes continued to happen more frequently. At that point, doctors confirmed that seizure activity was present, and so the medication protocol began. They upped his first med, they added a second, and then it continued. Amidst the pandemic, Dominic showed no improvement with the medications. They tried a third, they changed the third, they tried another. His seizures continued to get worse. Over time, it went from a few a day to several an hour. Sleep was really his only reprieve. My life began to revolve around caring for my child and responding to these seizures that became pervasive and seemingly constant. At the time, I was alone with my kids. I would normally have the support of my parents or in-laws, but we were on lockdown. And I realized that this is the case for so many caregivers and parents of kids with special needs on a regular basis. In addition to the unpredictability of the seizures, the constant worry that I was feeling for fear of injury, worry about the long-term impact these seizures might have, or the lack of involvement from his allied health team. Everything had gone virtual in March, and virtual didn't work for physiotherapy for my 3-year-old, or OT or SLP. When they found out that he was having seizures, everything stopped. They even said, let's not work on his goals at this time. Our village had shrunk significantly, and my nervous system took a beating as a result. It felt traumatic. This was also along the same time as many of the issues of anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism came to the surface, and it was front page news. The air felt heavy around me, and work became an afterthought. When I did work, which was at night when my husband would come home, it felt like a bit of an escape from the adrenaline rush and the fear of the whole day. Only I would walk down into my basement office where I am right now and listen to the trauma and anxieties of others. Something I value and wish to do, but I wasn't doing it for myself. I knew this wasn't sustainable, but I didn't yet know how it was going to unfold. By that summer, Dominic's development had stalled. He was no longer speaking as often. He was taking frequent naps, especially after a seizure. He had black eyes, bruises from falling when having a seizure mid-step, and yet he was a typical 3-year-old and didn't want to hold our hands. He was emotionally exhausted, and frankly, so was I. I was constantly on edge. I didn't want to leave his side. I felt like I could be no more than an arm's length away, and I also lived in fear that I needed to protect him at all costs. I tried to prevent an injury or to console him after a seizure. Loren, my daughter, felt neglected, and rightfully so. I was giving a lot more attention to Dominic than I was to her. And she adapted in one of the most remarkable ways. So she began playing a game where she would come to the room and pretend to be a doctor. And I remember one day I was sitting in the living room holding him after a pretty bad episode, and I hear a knock on the wall. She says in her little 4-year-old voice, "Hi, I'm a doctor. Has anyone in the house had a stroke or is maybe having seizures? I can help." This became a game. Seizures literally took over in many ways our lives. The team at Sick Kids had set up a series of tests, a 24-hour video EEG, a neuropsych assessment, and imaging, and they started talking about refractory epilepsy and the next steps. We were told that since 3 medicines failed to provide stability and relief to the seizures, that he was being considered now for surgical intervention. Due to the size of Dominic's stroke and when he was a baby, the surgery that was the best choice of having, support in terms of stopping and or limiting the seizures was called a functional hemispherectomy. I'm not sure if everyone's aware of that surgery, but they remove the skull, a part of the skull, remove the temporal lobe, and they go into the center of the brain to disconnect, in this case, the right hemisphere from the left. The right hemisphere then could continue to have seizures whenever, but it would no longer transmit that communication to the rest of his brain and body. It also meant that we had to say goodbye to whatever was left of the healthy part of the right hemisphere, because it would no longer be usable either. I must have asked at least a page worth of questions as much as I could to learn about the procedure. As terrified as I was about the surgery, I was equally scared about him not being a candidate, because at this point, it seemed to be the only chance of achieving some stability. So he was deemed a good candidate due to the nature of his stroke and the location of it. We were told that individuals with pediatric stroke history, like Dominic's, actually tend to do quite well with the surgery because the seizures are typically localized. That said, time was of the essence, as the surgery meant further disability and need for extensive rehabilitation again. By August 2020, he was deemed a candidate. We got a surgery date for the beginning of October. And that summer, I connected myself with a therapist. I started to exercise regularly when my husband was home as a form of decompression and sort of reducing some of my stress. I tried to mentally prepare for what was coming. There's another admission to acute care hospital around the corner, moving back to the rehab hospital for a few months, having to give up my work again, only seeing my daughter on weekends. I kept reminding myself how lucky I was to be preparing this time. The stroke came out of nowhere, and back then I dealt with a lot of shock. This time I had the luxury of knowing what was coming. I could research. I had familiarity with the places that we were going. I was just exhausted. And I straddled the two truths that logically I knew we would get through this, and the emotions of hating this reality and feeling like I wasn't enough or didn't have enough gas in the tank to get through. And as luck would have it, we our plans to isolate 10 days before surgery, meaning keeping my daughter home from school because the kids had returned at this point and my husband home from work. Dominic still spiked a fever 3 days before surgery and it was postponed. We made the plans, we did the prep, and in typical fashion, the universe kind of chuckled and said, nope, try again. By that point, the agony of waiting for surgery seemed just as hard as the mental preparation for the surgery itself. But the surgery day did come. And that day was one I'll never forget. I was exhausted and strong, scared yet steady. I was emotional yet stoic. I had posted on social media to my family and friends and received many messages of support, positive thoughts, sending strength. And I truly believe that we felt that strength. I know I did, that was sent our way, and it carried us through this period of our lives. We knew the surgery was going to be long. The surgeon had told us that it's typically a bit faster for children that had had stroke previously, one of the benefits, I guess. And instead of being 8 hours, it was going to be about 6. Due to the pandemic, though, only one parent could go inside. And so my poor husband had to wait in the car in the parking lot. They allowed me to bring him into the OR that day because he was so small. He was only 3. And I got to be with him until he fell asleep. I tell you, I remember etched in my brain walking down that hall and the windows on one side and the doors on the other. My anxiety started to rise and I just grabbed my son and I asked him to repeat after me. And he did, which was shocking. And I said, I am strong. I am brave. I can do anything. And he did. Leaving him on that table was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I had to trust other people with his life. And I'm glad I did. I waited in the waiting room for at about the 4-hour mark onward, waiting for the surgeon to come and say those magical words that parents are waiting to hear, which is it went well. And surgery started at 8 a.m. and around 2:30 in the afternoon, I saw the surgeon all masked up and gowned and immediately stood up in front of him. I felt a wave of relief wash over me when he told me that things had gone well and they were just finishing up. We spoke briefly and the doctor informed me that when he went to do the surgery, much of Dominic's brain that was impacted by the stroke was literally goop held together by scar tissue. No amount of medicine was going to stop his seizures. I didn't realize this was something I needed to hear, but I still think about it to this day and think that it validated that decision we had to make. So a few weeks after surgery, we moved back to Bloorview for 3 months. And you can change the slide now, sorry. But as parents and caregivers from Toronto and the GTA, you may share my sentiment about feelings of sick kids, you may not, and Bloorview. The way I describe it is, it's a place I never, ever want to be. And yet I am so grateful I have access to it. I remember grappling with the emotions around not wanting to go to live in a hospital with my child, and yet being so grateful we were able to get the care and support that we did. I was practicing something called the dichotomy of truth. I was grateful for the safety and the access to the team at Bloorview, and I hated living in a dorm-style room, showering without a lock on the door, no privacy, and all those things. They were two opposing things at the same time, and they coexisted for months. Now, rather than fight those feelings and push them down like I had done in the past, this time I tried to give myself space to feel it all. After all, this wasn't my first time going there, and I definitely wanted things to be different the second time around. Although it was taxing on me emotionally, it tested my marriage. It changed the relationship I have with my daughter, who unfortunately had to live without her mother for weeks at a time over the course of several months. We did it. And I share my story because it was at this time that I had never felt more alone and isolated in my life. And yet I knew in my core, I could not be the only person or parent or caregiver to feel this way, to feel that helplessness of wanting to make it better or wishing it were different and not being able to change it, or of blaming myself for not doing enough, for not being enough for my child. That feeling of wanting to learn more about the condition so that I could provide myself and my family the best quality of life, and yet feeling so overwhelmed by the complexity of neurology and really the uniqueness of epilepsy to each individual. I know this experience changed me. It changed me as a mother, as a wife, and as a clinician. And in a very weird way, I'm grateful for that. Because as intense as the darkness got in my own life during those years, I have recognized that it's because of that darkness that I'm able to appreciate the light and joy in my life in ways that I never would have imagined. Now, I'm a type A personality, so I really like to have things planned, usually just to appease my own anxiety, if for nothing else. I work hard to make sure there's a schedule and consistency for my kids, or at least did when they were much younger. And really, it's because I read that's what's best for them. And frankly, it makes me feel better to know what's coming up. It gives me this perception of control and predictability in my life. And this is what, for a lot of us that live with anxiety, is what happens, right? We want to be able to see what comes next, because then we can plan for it. And if we have a plan, then we can feel calm. But this period of life taught me that sometimes we can have the best plans and the best intentions, and the universe has other ones. It's important to trust, not that we need to know what comes next, but rather that we have the tools to make decisions when we need to. We can make plans, that's okay. And it's also okay if those plans change. This one's hard for me, still to this day, a little bit. I also learned that it's okay to have boundaries. It's okay to do something for myself. I learned through this experience, combined with my professional background, that it's not just about getting back on track of what used to be. It isn't about regaining control, which I thought it was for a long time. It's actually about recognizing that we create the path as we go. It's actually about learning to trust that we have the skills, the tools, and can build the village to manage when something unexpected happens. Because let me tell you, something unexpected will. It can seem scary not to know what the future holds. It still is for me sometimes. And it's also exciting. And we can switch to the next slide where I talk about, it changed my language. I changed my language from fear to opportunity, from worry to wonder. I used to worry about my child's future every single day, and now it's only some days. I wonder about it mostly. Language is powerful. It completely changes the energy of that sentence. I'm worried about my kids' education, for example. I wonder about my kids' education. It offers optimism and an opportunity for it to go another way. The same goes for the power of yet. I would love for you to take a second just to think about something that you've been feeling stuck on. Maybe some goal you've not been able to achieve yet. Have you ever thought to yourself, I can't do it? If you have, and I know I have, try saying, I can't do it yet. Do you hear the difference? The entire energy changes from one of finality to one that has hope that things could change. And this is something that I not only use with my clients and myself, but I use with my kids as well. Now, I have and continue to work towards developing a positive mindset and optimism about the future. I always say with a side of fear, because honestly, I have seasons in my life where anxiety does creep in. The fear sometimes gets stronger than others. And I accept that now for what it is. It's a bigger wave of emotion. I say all the time, emotions are like waves. Sometimes the tide is low and the waves are very, very small. And sometimes it's like a tsunami or a tidal wave, and the wave takes out the entire beach. But no matter what, the water always goes back into the ocean. And so we can rest assured that the emotion doesn't last forever. I used to fight this hard, and I used to shove those negative or uncomfortable feelings down deep within. I thought that if I just focused on being positive and just pushing through, that I would be okay. I realized that by doing that, I allowed the fear and anxiety an opportunity to grow, and I was giving it more power. I told myself I shouldn't be feeling this way. I should be grateful. It could be worse. That's invalidating. And I wasn't accepting emotions that I was feeling. So it fed that shame and that guilt, which continued the cycle of fear and anxiety. I talk about shoulding a lot in my practice, not to be confused with the curse word, although sometimes that comes out of my mouth too. But we can get into this trap of shoulding all over ourselves, which is simply another way to describe us in judgment. I learned how critical it is to give ourselves space to do both, validate and accept. We need to validate the fear, the overwhelm, the discomfort we feel in a situation. It's critical to accepting and moving forward. And we can move the slide, thanks. It's not the same as wallowing, right? It's important to validate so that we can accept what is. And only when we accept what is and validate and feel all that discomfort that we can actually then choose to move forward one step at a time. Letting go of my need to predict the future with some sense of certainty was one of the most difficult things I've done. And frankly, I still struggle with it from time to time. It's also been the most freeing. I recognize that need to control for what it is. It's anxiety and worry. And I know and acknowledge, knowing and acknowledging that, makes it actually feel less powerful. After Dominic's surgery, he started to develop again. His speech started to return and it boomed. And he started to walk a few weeks later. He had vision loss and exacerbated weakness on the left side, but his personality was roughly the same. Every day that went by without an active seizure that I could see, I felt like a tiny celebration. Rather than think of things in finalities like the seizures are gone for good, because I don't know that, I started to and continue to focus on the here and now. Epilepsy taught me that. It taught me the importance of letting go of the need to try to control the future. It's in some ways this weird gift that forced my family to focus on the here and now. I'm a much more mindful person in this present season of my life than I was before this started. I appreciate each day as the gift that it is. There's this cheesy cliche sentence that I actually really like now about the past is over, the future isn't promised, but today is a gift. And that's why we call it the present. It has some merit. And I want to be clear, I don't think there'll ever be a time that I look back on 2018 to 2021 with warm, fuzzy feelings on how it impacted my life and my child's life. I do, however, regard it as a major catalyst in our growth and learning and development. It was during these periods that I'd never learned more about myself as a person, a mother, a clinician. And I'd encourage you to think about that for yourself. Think of a time when you learned the most about yourself, about your own strength, about your own resilience. It wasn't when things were easy. It never is. It's always when things are hard. That's a funny thing with crisis. Okay, there's no better classroom than a crisis. And sometimes there's no better teacher than a trauma if we choose to do the learning when we're ready. And for us, it's always at a different pace than others. That's okay. I'm also grateful for all that I've learned about the strength of my children, strength of my marriage, and the village around us. Our experience with epilepsy taught me to appreciate life in a very different way, to enjoy the moments of calm, the dance parties in the kitchen or the living room, maybe the walk in the neighborhood forest or down by the lake. It taught me to regard epilepsy actually as a practice in mindfulness. Nothing brings me back to the present moment quite like a seizure. Nothing else seems important. It can be a painful exercise, but it's also an important one. If I could become so focused on a moment like that, then perhaps I could do the same for the moments that bring me joy and happiness. It just takes intention. As a registered social worker, I work within a positive psychology framework. This is a newer branch of psychology that has been studied over the past several decades. For hundreds of years prior, social scientists and psychologists really studied what's wrong with the brain. So we studied mental illness, and positive psychology does the exact opposite. It looks for what can go right and how we can emulate and teach this. I've seen firsthand, not just in my own experience, but in many of my clients, what applying growth mindset and facets of positive psychology can do. And the research is what informs my practice. So I wanted to share a few key takeaways from positive psychology that can be applied in everyday life. Number one, happiness is a choice. And don't get me wrong, sometimes it is a very hard choice. Other times it's easy. But there are tools that can help us to increase happiness. We can go to the next slide. There's a list there, things like exercise. And I don't mean, a HIIT workout or the longest run you've ever done. I'm talking a few minutes a day. Getting outside for fresh air, movement can be medicinal and makes us feel good for a variety of reasons. Meditation and mindfulness, which I will tell you, 97% of the people I'm estimating that come into my office are doing it wrong. I was doing it wrong at the beginning too. And they come to me and they say, Jen, oh my gosh, I tried meditation. It does not work. Because I sit down, I start to deep breathe, and 10 seconds in, I'm going, did I pick up my kid's medication? Am I going to be late for that appointment? What are we making for dinner? Oh my gosh, I left laundry on the floor and I didn't put it in the dryer. And then they get angry and they get frustrated. And it's not working. My mind keeps wandering and this isn't right. What if noticing those thoughts swirling around was being mindful? When we notice the thoughts drift and we start to do that spiral and we recognize it, we often meet it with that should talk, right? I shouldn't be thinking about this. I should be deep breathing and focusing on my breath. If we just notice them and then neutrally recognize, my mind wandered, I'm thinking about laundry, and then return back to the breath and focus on meditation, that is what it is at work. That is meditation. Over time, that swirling begins to slow down because we stop fighting it. And we keep going back to the breath. We're creating a new brain map. And then those thoughts pop up less frequently, and we start to calm our mind. It doesn't happen overnight, but it is worth practicing. I should say, and it is worth practicing to get better. Deep breath is another one that is often done incorrectly, myself included, when I first started. And so I was going to ask if you're able and willing to try a deep breath with me. So the first time I'll do it, if you can see me, it's an inhale through the nose, hold at the top, and an exhale through the nose and mouth. Most of the time when I do this, and I see people doing this, their shoulders and their chest are rising and falling. I'd love for you to try it again, only this time, I don't want anything in the shoulder and chest to move if you can. Instead, really going into the belly. And when you inhale, you're expanding the belly like a balloon, and we're exhaling, bringing the belly button to the spine. And we'll try that together. So we'll inhale, expanding that belly, hold at the top, and then exhale, bringing that belly button to the spine. It feels very different because we are not taught to breathe this way. This is diaphragmatic breathing. And what diaphragmatic breathing does is it engages the vagus nerve, which sends a message to our brain to help calm our bodies. It takes practice. It doesn't happen overnight, but this can help with calming our nerves, with decreasing anxiety, with helping us fall asleep. But we don't want to just use it when we're in a pinch. We want to practice it from the day to day. Think of learning a piece of music. I wouldn't give you the sheet music the day of the piano recital and tell you to play it. I would give it to you in advance and give you an opportunity to practice. Same thing. Another one is journaling. This can be, pen to paper, scientifically speaking, is sort of the best in terms of our brain sees our handwriting, but that's not for everybody. Voice notes, video recordings, pen to paper, typing, whatever works. Really, the concept is getting our thoughts out of our head, and it's a form of externalization. Another one's looking forward, having something to look forward to. Maybe there's something going on this weekend. Maybe it's the weather getting better. Perhaps it was tonight's event. Certain strategies, again, are going to work better for certain people. There's no real recipe, and there's many other strategies as well, but we need to be patient. It takes 3 weeks to build a habit. And with that, I'll bring you to my challenge, which is the next slide, on the idea that I often suggest starting with is something as simple as a gratitude practice. You start with 3 things you're grateful for from each day, and you get specific. Most people, when I do this activity with them, say, I'm grateful for my home, I'm grateful for my family, I'm grateful for my friends or my job. I get that. I want to know from today, what made you feel grateful for those things? Did you spend a moment standing in the living room, feeling the sun come through the window and hit your skin that made you appreciate that space? Did you get 2 sips of coffee before having to run out the door and got to enjoy it while it was warm? Maybe you made it to work on time when you thought you were going to be late, but you got every green light. Did you have a dance party in the kitchen with your partner or your kids that made you feel grateful for that moment with your family? And frankly, on challenging days, maybe you're grateful the day is done. You did it. It's over. You made it. We're not making things up and forcing ourselves to feel grateful in a disingenuous way, but rather we're putting a magnifying glass over what already exists, and we're changing our filter from autopilot to gratitude. Sometimes we need the reminder that we've already made it through 100% of the worst days of our lives. We have to trust we can get through anything. Other different strategies as well, outside of gratitude practice, are things like building a social network. Often when humans go through difficulties, we retreat, we go inside. But positive psychology research really proves that the opposite is true. Those that do well through challenge are actually the ones that reach outward, accepting help and even asking for help if we need it. You're in this fabulous network and you're part of an organization like Epilepsy Toronto, you know what I'm talking about. You understand the importance of connecting with people who get it in some way. The other thing that's changed my life, and I've seen change the lives of many others, is focusing on the effort and not the output. We have lived through generations of being conditioned to push until we reach that goal, right? How many of you have ever said or heard, I'll be happy when? I'll be happy when I graduate. I'll be happy when I land that job. I'll be happy when my health changes. What the research tells us is the opposite is true. When we focus on the present moment and start to accept and love ourselves where we are in our journey, we open ourselves up to the possibility of achieving success in ways that we didn't imagine. Acceptance doesn't mean we don't strive to change. And it doesn't mean that if we love ourselves the way we are today, that we're perfect and we don't need to improve. But rather, it means that we're meeting ourselves and treating ourselves with compassion and gentleness rather than judgment and self-deprecation. I'm full of challenges today, I just realized, but the one other one you can think about is notice when you're using terms like I should have. When we start to recognize shoulding as another form of judgment, we become aware of it and then we can be compassionate to it. Can you forgive yourself in that moment and recognize that this is a habit of how I'm thinking and I'm doing the best I can? It's going to look different on a day, our effort is going to look different on a day when we're well fed, well rested. Maybe we got a workout in, we're feeling good. Maybe we did our gratitude practice, since everyone's going to try that now. Versus a day where we're not feeling so great. Maybe we didn't sleep. Maybe we've been feeling off. Maybe we're sick. The effort remains the same, and we should feel proud of ourselves for the effort, not just the outcome. And the last principle I'll talk about briefly is following the path of least resistance. Our brains are made up of millions of brain maps. So when we learn new information, we take it in one part of our brain analyzes it, understands it, and then it stores it so that the next time we have an experience, we don't have to think and analyze it again. As we have similar experiences or we interpret experiences the same way over and over, our brain maps get stronger and stronger. When we want to make a change in our lives or we decide, to change the filter in which we see the world, we need to do it one step at a time. This starts by making small changes in our lives that are sustainable. Our brains are naturally lazy, and I'm not saying that to be offensive or rude. It's a survival thing. We're relying on these maps so that we don't actually have to analyze things every time. It's an efficiency. If we want to make a change, then we have to do what's called following the path of least resistance. So there was an example in a book by Sean Aker, who has written about positive psychology, about wanting to learn an instrument. And he talks about this wanting to learn guitar. And he says, okay, every time there's a commercial on TV, obviously this is an older book when we used to watch TV with commercials, I'm going to go upstairs, I'm going to get the guitar and I'm going to practice. And every time a commercial came on, he didn't do it. Why? Because it took too long to go upstairs and get the guitar. So he decided to make a change. He simply brought the guitar beside the couch. And the next time a commercial came on, it took him less than 20 seconds to pick up the guitar and start playing. So we started. We really need to make things as simple as possible. So something as easy as this gratitude practice, for example, can be done in 30 seconds to a minute at the end of your day. You don't have to write it down or anything. It's more so a practice of mind. We just have to start small and know that change happens 1 degree at a time. Throughout my experience as a parent caregiver over the last 5 years, I've gone through extreme highs and lows, pain, trauma, healing, learning. And as I read in my book, there were periods that were very dark, and I'm honest about that. My own guilt and shame that I wasn't doing enough, or I was feeling helpless or sorry for myself or my family, had a much louder voice back then than it does now. Grief is a real thing, and it's not always about the loss of a loved one. It's also about the loss of what I thought life was going to look like back then. When I talk to parents and caregivers, and actually individuals who are experiencing this, there's a ton of guilt and shame about the grief until we realize that holding on to that shame is actually what keeps the guilt strong. When we accept it as a natural part, and we accept the grief as a natural part of our emotions, we can grow around it. Acceptance doesn't mean we like something. And it doesn't mean we don't work to make the best of our situation or change what is within our control. It does mean that we acknowledge what is, and we allow space to feel whatever we feel about it, and that we choose to accept happiness, or we choose to find happiness, and joy or gratitude in our day. The brain is a powerful organ, and it has the power to learn, unlearn, and relearn thought patterns. I write about a whole bunch of these strategies in the book, Making It to Monday, and I talk about my own struggle and my road to healing alongside my child's. I relied on neuroplasticity to help Dominic, and one day I realized I was doing exactly the same thing for myself and clients. One valuable learning for me is that it's not about the end result, it's about celebrating the starting line. Marathon runners don't become marathon runners because they hit the finish line. They became marathon runners the moment they started the race. So what if we started celebrating the starting line and all the steps in the middle? I encourage you to try to celebrate making it to Monday. I do want to thank you all so very much for your time. I'm so honored to have been the speaker today. I hope there was value in that. Oh, I totally forgot to tell you to change the slide. But thank you so much. And I hope you have a great spring and summer.
Anyone has a question for Jennifer, I think Geoff, our executive director, is going to help facilitate this, but you can raise your hand in the reactions button, and or you can put it in the comment section, and we'll see how that goes. Geoff, are you there?
I am. My computer suffered a small seizure somewhere along the line, and so I came in and out, but I caught the vast majority of what you had to say, and it's just it's very inspiring. I'm sure a lot of people are going to ask questions, so thank you for taking a little bit of extra time with us. But I think that I might want to just start it off. So as the director of an agency that in my mind is mostly about promoting connections between people, bringing people together, I listened to you talk about the isolation, particularly during the pandemic, and being cut off from people, but just feeling alone with this struggle for the longest time. And I wonder, and you didn't, I don't know if you had opportunities to connect with other families through your Sick Kids Journey, or any other kinds of organizations like ours. Give me a sense of what we could do in terms of promoting a sense of community and connection as an organization that would help people go through the struggle that you've gone through.
I think offering a space in which you do, like spaces like this, or community, social gatherings for those with lived experience, for those that are caregivers, and even a combination of the two, to allow a safe space for people to share their stories. So yes, I did connect more so the first time, because during the pandemic, when we were there in 2020, both at Sick Kids and Blurview, there wasn't a lot of opportunity to socialize because everyone was sort of constricted to their room. But the piece around when you have a lived experience that's shared with other people, and the reality is our experiences are all unique, right? So even if we've had the same sort of diagnostic trajectory, our experience of that and our interpretation of that's going to be very different. But there's something about being in a room with people that just get it. And it changes things when you're able to express an experience, and you see the people nodding, and you know that they understand. And this was the difference between talking to people that were living in the hospital with me versus talking to my own family and friends. Mm-hmm. And so I think the opportunity to have people come together is so critical, and and offering a safe space to share stories where people feel comfortable, of course.
Okay. Thank you. And it's important for us because it's what we're all about. I'm not going to dominate. I could ask you lots and lots of questions, but we're getting some questions on the chat. And so I'm going to work my way through and mention a few of them. Heather Southern asks, may I ask you to elaborate more on the power of yet and how to apply it in our everyday lives?
Yeah, it's as simple as changing the structure of a sentence. So when I talk about, and I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head, my son really struggles, for example, with dressing. He has pretty significant hemiplegia. So getting dressed is a very difficult thing, particularly shirts, because his arm is limited. And there are days where he would get very frustrated and say, I can't do it. I can't get dressed. And I'll look at him and I'll say, you can't get dressed yet. and I ask him to repeat it. And over time, what we noticed is he actually gets less frustrated because he's saying yet. And so there's this idea that he can do it soon, and we keep working towards it. And is there going to be things that he can't do? Sure, of course there are. And that we cross that bridge when we get there, but we figure out a way to make something work. We need to use the power of yet. So even for myself, when I was mostly in 2020, I had this weird experience where I had been through the medical system as an employee, and then I experienced it as a parent, and now I was going through it again. And I had to position myself in a way where logic and emotion were really kind of at odds. And what I kept saying to myself is, this is not okay. I'm not okay yet. It just gave me optimism to recognize that these emotions weren't going to last forever. So it really is about practicing it in the mirror and knowing that sometimes when you say it, you're not going to believe it at first, but the brain actually doesn't know the difference. And if you keep saying something over and over again, it will end up, you will believe what you're saying. And believing is more than 50% of what we need to achieve it. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's great. Helen asks, Helen was instrumental in helping us just to do a writers group for a group of people exploring their own epilepsy. So it was a very dynamic group. And she asks, for our new writers of Epilepsy Toronto group, I would like to ask about the process of writing the book. How did you choose what to put in, what to leave out?
That's a really good question. So I've been a journal keeper. I've had a journal since I was a child, off and on. So like for 30 years probably. And I hadn't written in a journal for a while. And then once we got to the hospital, I started to journal actually because the sort of social worker hat that I had on was like, wow, Jen, you're definitely in shock. You're not going to remember any of this. And I was meeting so many doctors that, and nurses and stuff. I wanted to write names down. So I got this notebook, I started writing, and that kind of morphed into me writing my emotions. And then several months later, when I had talked about making this into a book because I couldn't find one, I had a conversation with my husband, and actually we had a discussion together because there's a lot of sort of personal information in the book, and I had to do what felt authentic to my story and also wanted to be respectful of my family because I not that I talk poorly about my husband, but certainly I share things that I don't think he would normally share with other people, and the same thing with our family. And I think how I decided what to put in and what to leave out had to do with my why. If I put something in there, I did it because I felt, number one, it happened. It was authentic to my experience. And two, I learned something from it. And I wish I had read it when I was going through it. So I've heard a saying, my publisher said to me once that we write the book we wish we had. And I think that is so valuable. So I would say, choose what to put in it based on what you wish someone would write for you based on your experience.
Helen, can we unmute Helen? She wants to do a follow-up, but actually give her voice. Give Helen voice.
I am. Thank you for noticing that.
Oh, look at that. Thank you. I really do want to thank Jennifer and congratulate her. Jennifer, full disclosure, we just did 8 weeks with a writing group in Epilepsy Toronto, and they were unbelievable. We started out saying, well, no one wants to hear my story, and by the end we're having to hold them back from writing the full book and getting it published, right? And you've done it. So I know some of the group are here, and I'm so in awe that you managed to get it written, get it published. So what was behind my question was, yes, the privacy of other people is it was a huge source of discussion for us. And of course, as you write it as if no one's going to read it, and then you have to start taking stuff out. So that was what was behind my question. Another thing was the unpalatable stuff. For example, in this particular genre, there is obviously a very strong tendency to pull positive messages out of something that's frankly disaster. And you've done this so well because you're a professional. I mean, it's so, you've used your professionalism so well. However, there are some things that are left unresolved, aren't there? How do we write about our anger? How do we write about the injustice of it? There's no neat solution to any of this. And typically they don't, difficult emotions like that don't find their way into these books because people don't want to read them very often.
So I have to say, I couldn't agree with you more. And actually part of the reason that I wrote the book the way that I did was because the only book that I could find to read, and this is not a knock to the book, it was a very well-written book, was The Spark, which is about a mother who has a child with autism. And it was very uplifting. And not that I didn't want to write a book that was uplifting, because I did, but it did not talk to me or did not speak to me at that time about that darkness. And I think, how do you write about it is you write it. You have to get it out, and you can decide through editing, because editing is a big part of writing, which I did not know before I did this. It's a very, very sort of hands-on process and long. Write write the emotion as real as it feels in that moment, because that's the truth. And as long as you're writing the truth, I think that's what's important. And the dichotomy of truth is so important, and even plurality of truth. I mean, I say 2 things can be true at one time, but really 10 things can be true at one time, in that we can feel like, I still feel anger. And I was interviewed on a podcast back in the fall, and the caster said, how do you deal with this? It seems so unfair. And I went, it is unfair. So there's nothing fair about this. But that is what it is. And it's important to just acknowledge it, because when we don't acknowledge it is when it sits inside us and just grows. And that's not helpful for healing either.
Mark is asking where the best place is to find your book.
Thanks. You can find it on Amazon. You can also find it on Indigo and Chapters online. So the hard copy or the ebook. And I'm going to be actually at a book signing June 4th at the Chapters on Vega Boulevard. So there'll be copies there, like hard copies as well. But yeah, that's how to find it.
All right. He also says that
you can send us that information, and we'll try and share that so that people have it. That'd be great.
Yeah.
He further says, I also act as a caregiver with my adult siblings for our father, and there are times when we feel overwhelmed. But then we push through and celebrate the small wins while knowing the path isn't set in stone, and we've yet to set our own limits as to what we can do. His question is, what was the biggest hurdle you faced, and how did you transition it to a win?
That's a really good question. I don't know if I've ever quantified the biggest hurdle in terms of what felt the biggest. I mean, there's been several. Quantify as a win or transition it to a win. I think the biggest hurdle for me about myself, because I don't have control over others, and part of that has been the biggest hurdle, is the fact that I don't have control over this, is so I grew up with a family of very hardworking immigrants. They, keep calm, carry on, don't complain, do your work, and get stuff done. So when this all happened, what was the most difficult for me was actually accepting that I couldn't do this on my own. And that doesn't mean I'm a failure. And so to be able to accept help and actually find the strength in vulnerability and recognize that it's actually a lot harder for me to reach out and say, this is so hard, this sucks, I'm struggling, was actually harder to do than to just sit there and go, no, I'm okay, I'm good, I got it. And I think once I accepted that and I was able to move forward, that to me was it allowed me to transition to a win, because I was actually able to start healing in some capacity. I mean, I've healed even though the situation is still unfolding before my eyes. I mean, I wrote this book. I started writing the book before he even started seizing in 2020. So I actually thought the book was done in 2019. And then the pandemic happened and the epileptic explosion happened. And it was my husband that turned to me and was like, I don't think so. I think you better start writing again. And there we had it. So it was interesting how I think the hurdle changes, but I think the biggest piece was around accepting that this isn't what I would have chosen. This isn't easy. And I need to accept help and accept that it's okay to need help.
Thank you. They're coming in faster and I have to scroll them back. Heather asks if you have any tips on journaling, maybe how to convince yourself to do it or how to do it in general.
Oh, that's great. I always say to keep a journal as close to you as possible. So that path of least resistance is really helpful. Like if your journal is sitting on your bedside table, but you feel compelled to write during dinner, you're probably not going to go get it. Right. So if it's, some people keep it in their, what do you call it? In their bag, like a backpack or in their purse or something. I've had other people do it on their phone. So they'll journal on their phone, and most of us have a device with us most of the time these days. So that's a good one. I also encourage emotional writing. So most people, and the way I describe it is I had a few clients, and myself included, years and years ago, had journals, and on one side it said not so good day, and on one side it said good day. And you would just open the side in which the day that you had, put the date, and then write. And every time the not so good day would get filled up way before the good day, because we need that outlet when things are hard. Right. And so that I would encourage you to do that and utilize it as a form of externalization, because the reality is we're having the conversation in our head anyway. Right. We're saying these things over and over again. And if you find you're ruminating or you're kind of stuck on something, write it down. And it doesn't have to be formal. Right. You can write it on a scrap piece of paper if you need to.
A quick question from the perspective as a spouse, listening to you describe your journey, especially as it started, it became all consuming for you. It was your life. It used up all your oxygen. And I wonder is Paul your husband?
Yeah.
I wonder what his role was in all of this, how he, like, sometimes I think we can be pushed aside because there's no time for us as a spouse. It really is it's all consuming. And it's the only way that you're going to be able to deal with it. And I wonder how you work that out in terms of your partnership.
So that is a big piece of our story, and it's not lost on Paul and I, because we've had lots of conversation about this, but it's not lost on us that the divorce rate skyrockets when you have a medical crisis with your child or special needs or something like that. And for good reason, right? People cope in different ways. The caregiving, completely changes. Your amount of time that you have with each other changes. And this is where I do think the benefit of my profession, was helpful in that I didn't shy away from having these difficult conversations with my partner. So for example, and if you do read the book, and I'm happy to talk about it more, but we coped very, very differently. So when the stroke initially happened, I was crisis doer mode, made a plan. You need to go home and get this bag, get the breast pump, blah, 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 all this stuff. And he was completely frozen and emotional. I don't think I cried any time except when they told me good news for the first 2 weeks. So, and my husband was complete opposite. And so we had to sort of reconcile and actually respect the fact that we were on very different pages. And the whole deal was, my analogy with him is, I don't care if we're on different pages as long as we're in the same book. Mm-hmm. Or I don't care if we play different positions. We want to play different positions, but we're still on the same team. You don't want a whole team of pitchers. That's not helpful. Right. So it was learning to respect and actually accept our differences. And the piece I think that helped us the most, because there was a lot of distance, not just emotionally, but physically. Like I lived in the hospital for months at a time. And during the pandemic, he couldn't visit. Like if he visited, I had to leave. Like it was one in, one out. Sick kids, I think I just changed the rule when we got there. So we were both able to be there at the same time. But we just talked about it. And we talked about how this was a season. And just like how emotions didn't last forever, this season of separation wouldn't last forever. And it sucked. And we acknowledged that. And then we made a commitment to check in and made it as minimal as possible, because we didn't want to disappoint each other, I guess. So it was a text message here, a 2-minute phone call there. And we trusted that, we were committed to making it work. And we still, it's still work, right? Even the best marriages take work, but that's how we did it. But we are completely different, even to this day.
That's interesting.
Great. Final messages from us are, if you haven't yet, please make sure you register for our Purple Walk. It's happening June 17th, and it's a great time to build that community, to see those friends, to make connections with those people who have similar lived experience and share our stories. That's what Purple Walk is all about, that. And of course, raising funds is part of it too, but really we just want to see your faces and get you all out at College Park. So if you haven't yet done that, please visit the website. There's links there, and we would love to see you register and tell all your friends. And other than that, I think that is all we have for tonight.